Hi, I'm Femi OK. You're in the stream. The US Attorney General has made a legislative change that goes after legal marijuana. Jeffrey Sessions' move is actually in contradiction to general US public opinion about cannabis use. So now what effect will this legislative change have? Today we're getting into the debate about the impact that legalizing marijuana has, and here are two experts with differing opinions.
The decision by Jeff Sessions to rescind the Cole memo is problematic on a number of levels. First, it ignores basic science, but it also is problematic because it undermines successful reforms in multiple states. The states that have legalized marijuana have found not only that public health and safety have improved, but they've also had obviously a dramatic reduction in arrests for marijuana offenses and an increase in tax savings.
A major concern is for how marijuana, and particularly the THC, the psychoactive ingredient, is marketed and sold in states where it has become legal. We market and sell this product to kids. It's done with cartoons, it's in candies, it's in all different things. There's no guidelines around it. It's marketed in a way that we would not allow, for example, alcohol or tobacco to be marketed. So as one great example, there's 10 servings of THC, the active ingredient that gets you high from marijuana, in one gummy bear. When's the last time you tried cutting one of these into 10 pieces?
Now, we asked our community about the legal status of marijuana in their country, and we heard results from all over. In Ghana, Hussein tells us most people smoke marijuana and producers are always arrested and prosecuted, yet the Narcotic Control Board have done their best to curb the situation. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, Bello says, I feel it should be legalized. We are currently spending millions on law enforcement. Think about the economic and health benefit of legalizing it. Tobacco kills more, alcohol destroys more, yet legal. Vingayi in Zimbabwe says marijuana is not legalized, and I don't think that will change anytime soon. The use of it is a serious offence. Meanwhile, down in New Zealand, Anthony shares his thoughts. It does not make things safer having a heavy-handed war on low-harm drugs. But of course, right here in the US, marijuana remains illegal at the federal level and is considered to be on par with heroin. But 8 states have legalized it to varying degrees, often leaving confusion over the gap between state and federal law. In Texas, it is illegal, and legislation did not pass to change that status. Illinois will vote on measures this spring and may see a change. And here in the District of Columbia, it is legal to have and use marijuana for recreational use. Most recently, on January the 1st, California became the latest state to legalize recreational marijuana. But just a few days later, the Attorney General Sessions announced a change in policy. Here with us today to discuss the issue, we have Shanita Penny, President of the Minority Cannabis Business Association and founder of Budding Solutions. Dr. Carl Hart is Chair of the Department of Psychology at Columbia University and author of High Price. Dr. Kevin Sabat is founder and president of Smart Approaches to Marijuana. And Ben Cord is author of Weed Inc. and a consultant in the addiction treatment industry. Hello, guests. Really good to see you. Let's start on Twitter. Bertha Madras says, thank you, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, for your courageous decision to rescind the previous administration's guidance on enforcing federal marijuana laws. So Bertha is saying thank you. Carl, you're saying what?
Who follows Bertha Madras? Who listens to her? One. And two, when I think about this decision by the Attorney General, it's really not the Attorney General. We really need Congress to act and legalize marijuana. Now, there are a number of reasons why I think that marijuana should be legal. Chief among them, I think about how we enforce drug laws in the United States. In the United States, for example, black people are 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana. And we can go down the line. We use our drug policy in part to basically carry out racial discrimination. That's one. And then two, when I think about some of the arguments against legalization, they deal with my area, science. And when I look at the scientific information, knowledge, even the scientific knowledge suggests that marijuana should be legal. And so, I mean, we should have a great conversation because I like to hear the arguments and I like to hear what the other panelists say as well.
A lot of problems
Kevin.
with that. Yeah, no, I think there are a lot of problems with that. I do think there's some agreement, but let's do first things first. I don't think it's fair to attack a former deputy drug czar in the Bush administration who has a PhD and works at Harvard University in the neuropsychopharmacology. So that's what Dr.
I'm sorry, I did not attack her. I did not attack her.
Well, okay.
Gentlemen, let's stay on topic and not bicker.
Who listens, who follows, but a lot of people do. She was on the President's Opioid Commission. So, but the more important thing, let's get to the crux of the argument, I agree, is that we do not need to have a false dichotomy between criminalization and legalization. We're acting as if there are two choices. We either have to lock people up or we have to do what we're doing in America, which is basically start big tobacco all over again. And that's why actually every major medical organization in the United States and around the world actually don't want to legalize marijuana. They don't agree with Dr. Hart. They don't agree that we should legalize at all. They don't think the science leads us there because today's marijuana is much more harmful than it used to be. Because it's in Schedule 1, that does not mean it's on par with heroin. It means it's classified in the same way because it has a high addictive potential and no raw medical use. But there are components that do have medical use, and we should recognize that. I think CBD is an important issue to research. But we're conflating so many things here. We're conflating decriminalization with legalization. Those are two very different things. We're also conflating CBD and the non-psychoactive components with THC. Well, a lot of people are, and I think that's...
So gentlemen, just take...
No, we're not. We're in the conversation here. Let's have our conversation here. And Kevin said some things that were just wrong. Number one, when we think about big tobacco, one of the reasons that we're concerned about big tobacco is because tobacco lied to the people of the United States and the world.
Marijuana industry
Can you please let me finish? Can you please let me finish? Sure. We're upset with big tobacco because they lied. They lied and said that their product was not addictive, not harmful, and they even set up a research arm to say that they were going to try to have independent research, which was a lie. We're not upset with tobacco because they are making money. They're in a capitalistic society like they should make money.
So Cole and Kevin, just take a pause for a moment because we not only have you in the conversation, we have two other guests and our online community as well, trying to get some community in here as well. Shanita, let me just share this with you. This is Calico. Ultimately, I don't see this as a big policy shift. The best way our industry can respond is by doing what we've always done, operate transparency. So we're talking about the cannabis industry, the growing cannabis industry. I know that you have a part in that. What impact is this going to have on small growers?
Absolutely. This wasn't a shock to anyone in the industry. We have been operating in a place of, leaning on the Cole Memo and other protections that we have in place, and we haven't done the legwork of ending prohibition, which is what we need to do. It's not enough to end prohibition without having a lens on racial equality and equity in this space. So we have to look at the social justice perspective in that lens. And so when we start to talk about what happened last week with Jeff Sessions rescinding the Cole Memo, essentially what it does is light a fire under this industry. And what we should be doing is uniting and ending prohibition, really changing policy so that we are operating in a place where we're not in a silo in a state. We've had, 8 states now that have great programs that have been successful. The heads of those states, at least 2, Colorado and Washington, Oregon and Washington, excuse me, that are coming out and saying, hey, we will stand tall, we will support our industry. And what we should be focused on, again, is being unified and, Republicans, Democrats, let's end prohibition.
Ben, what's different now from 6 months ago? What difference does it make to the marijuana business, the growing business, medical users? Ben?
I'm not sure if I'm the right one to answer that question. I'm not in the business. I don't have a whole lot to do with the industry. I'm just a Coloradan who kind of tries to pay attention to what's happening in my own state. I think that the biggest thing that it's going to do is make a lot of the folks who have large-scale operations nervous about it. This shift has nothing to do with users. It has nothing to do with people who choose to consume this substance on their own. It really has everything to do with the people who are setting up shop in these 8 states and doing all they can to get as much money out of us as possible. You know, my home state has shifted a lot. Like, we have really embraced this industry in many ways, and I think there were a lot of us who weren't expecting it to be as hard hitting and going as quickly as it is. It's this is about an industry. This isn't about somebody choosing to use a substance or not. This is about whether or not we want to allow people to profit with weed.
If operators in this industry are not comfortable operating, patients will suffer, consumers will suffer if they have to go out of business, if they have to shut their doors in anticipation of, you know, a raid now. Patients will ultimately suffer. The employees of those businesses will ultimately suffer.
What's so amazing also is that there actually there's a lot of evidence saying that it has not been going well in these states. In fact, there are more Black and Hispanic kids being arrested in Denver now for marijuana possession than there was before legalization.
That
in
is
Washington, D.C. Actually, the guest there is agreeing with me. Actually, and the second thing is, let me finish. We've seen more arrests in Washington, D.C., and they are almost all African Americans for public use as well as distribution. So, you know, if you want to right the wrongs of the war on drugs, and I think we would have a lot of agreement that there has been racist policies that we want to reverse. You don't do it with creating another massive industry who we know will be led by rich white guys from Silicon Valley and Wall Street, and that, by the way, is who's making money from this business. That, by the way, is who's leading this. And the issue is we wouldn't need to embrace that. We could simply change our criminal laws. We don't want to go after users. And by the way, this memo simply goes back to pre-2013 days. It's not a change in policy. It simply says there is a federal law. It's been there for a while. And we would all agree, if you are going to legalize marijuana, which I don't think we should, let me just get one point of agreement in here. We would agree that you should do it through Congress, right?
So
Not state
Carl,
by state.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl. Kevin, go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, yes, Kevin just said something that's just so misinformed. The fact is, when you look at states like Colorado and Washington, and you look at the numbers of people who are being arrested for marijuana, that number is dramatically down. It is true that we still have racial disparities in arrests, but the number of Black people who are being arrested in those places is dramatically decreased. So I don't understand what you're even talking about.
Let me bring in another voice here. This is the voice of Will Jones in D.C. Will Jones is part of your organization, Kevin, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. He talks about the Black community in D.C. This is his perspective. Have a listen, Carl.
The reason that I'm working on this issue is because I want to see marijuana policy move forward in a way that has a positive impact in my community. Now, right now, if I walk out the door of my home in almost any direction, the first store that I'm going to get to is going to be a liquor store with cigarette advertisements plastered all over the windows. And that is because for decades, the alcohol and tobacco industry have disproportionately targeted minority and disenfranchised communities. Unfortunately, if we look at places like Denver, Colorado, we're seeing that the marijuana industry is doing the exact same thing, where some minority communities have one pot shop for every 43 residents. I want to see people put before profit, and legalization doesn't do that.
Carl, what do you make of that?
Okay, that is so, again, this is misleading. It when we look at cancer, we look at illnesses, we look at anything in American society, we can see that it disproportionately negatively impact Black people. But when you weigh the totality of this thing, for example, like prisons and those sorts of things, changing drug laws will decrease the number of Black people caught up in the criminal justice system. Period.
Well,
that sort of comment that was made there, can you please? That comment that was made was just simplistic and misinformed.
Yeah. I don't think so. Carl, I have a question, a genuine question, because I think we need to have dialogue in this day and age where dialogue is really just not, we don't have it, and that's why I'm proud to have worked in both for Republicans and Democrats. Carl,
I agree.
And others
please ask the question.
Well, don't you think that we could have a compromise where we can go a long way in reducing incarceration rates as well as righting the wrongs of the past by by simply removing criminal penalties for marijuana and not actually having a whole system like alcohol or tobacco where we actually enter into that capitalist system with selling, and we simply focus on saying, you know what, if you possess an amount or whatever, there isn't going to be jail time. And we actually, and you would agree, we want to discourage use among young people because today's THC is so much powerful than it used to be. But wouldn't that be a compromise where you could essentially remove the criminal penalties as opposed to saying we want to let this out into our capitalist society and kind of hope for the best? You know,
I hear the question, Kevin. Let me hear the answer.
Yeah.
Carl?
Yeah,
and Shanita, I know you want to weigh in on this as well. Carl, go ahead, and then Shanita.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, I really like the idea of making sure that we remove the criminal penalties. The problem is when you just remove the criminal penalties, particularly when it relates to a psychoactive substance, without making it legal, you don't have the quality control that's necessary to make sure that whatever people we're getting is something that has high quality. That's one. And two, this notion that you keep referring to is that the marijuana today is more dangerous than the marijuana that people had previously. That just simply is not true. Throughout the history of humankind, we have known how to increase the THC levels in marijuana. It's true. The average concentration of THC on the street today is higher than that in 1970. But people have
gentlemen, I did say that Shanita would come in here. Let me just make some space for Shanita. Shanita, I'm making space for you. Go ahead.
I absolutely think there's a place for regulation, especially as you look at this medicine as medicine. If I am growing this for my personal use, I'm not concerned. I know where I planted it. I know what I use to grow this cannabis, and I'm okay with that. It's the same thing as growing tomatoes in my home. But when I go into a pharmacy or a dispensary, I want to know that this medicine has been tested. I want to know what it's been processed with, if anything. And ultimately, I want to be able to look at a label and know that there are 10 servings in that gummy or in that chocolate bar so that I can responsibly consume as a recreational user or as a medical patient.
Ben, what do you want to add? Go ahead, Ben. Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, listen, I'm a Coloradan, and I go into dispensaries all the time, and I've seen what the industrialization has done in my state. And first off, you guys, like, just hop on Weed Maps for a minute. It's an app on the iPhone store, and you can see that all of the dispensaries are concentrated in the lowest income neighborhoods. The Denver Post ran a wonderful piece called, really simple title to remember, Most Dispensaries Located in Poor Minority Neighborhoods. And as a result, these communities have been inundated with cannabis shops. So you've got all of these weed shops around there targeting their marketing to the folks who live inside of those communities. I don't have a shop for 8 miles from my house, but they are all over the poor neighborhoods inside of Denver. And as far as this raise in the potency in us keeping track on what's going on, throw this one into your search engine. Look at the recalls that have happened in Colorado as a result of the pesticides, as the antifungal things that we found. We are not regulating the way that it's produced. And you've gone from what naturally occurs inside of cannabis. I'm a former myself. Like, what naturally occurs inside of cannabis is less than 0.5% THC. And what we're selling in Colorado now, because it's been industrialized to the point that it is, and there's all this money behind it, we got concentrates that are 98% THC. While mankind has interacted with cannabis for millennium, we've interacted with cannabis this strong for 5 years.
Let me just bring in Jeff Sessions,
okay,
Attorney General of the United States.
I have to say something about Ben's comment. I have to say one thing about Ben's comment. I just find it remarkable that people who have never, ever actually tried to address any of the concerns of minority communities make comments about these shops being in minority communities causing problems. I write about my
do that ever?
Please.
Dr. Hart, I've spent a lot of time doing that. You can't accuse me of that, sir. Like, don't let the suit fool you. I grew up on public assistance, man, in Washington, D.C. is where I got sober. I'm not the straight out of the suburbs. Never done anything.
I'm not saying that you didn't grow up on public assistance, nor do I care. What I'm saying is that you are making comments about minority communities. Are you kidding me? What you are saying about minority?
Why can I not do that? Why can I not empathize and have a conversation about people
because you have not.
Just because I'm Listen, man, just because I'm heterosexual and cisgender, that hasn't kept me from serving on the board of directors for the National Association of Lesbian, Gay, Transgender, Bisexual Treatment Providers. I can be a part of a conversation.
All right, gentlemen, I also want Jeff Sessions to be a part of this conversation. Let's go back to December of 2017 when he talked about his drug policy and where marijuana fitted into that. Have a listen.
The general view that this is not a healthy substance, I think that's pretty clear. And then there's a policy response that we and the federal government needs to be prepared to take and do so appropriately and with good sense. I do believe, and I'm afraid, that the public is not properly educated on some of the issues related to marijuana, and that would be a matter that we could, all of us together, maybe be helpful in working on, and that would allow better policy to actually be enacted.
Shanita, is that enough clarity for you as president of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, where the US is going in terms of the current administration going in terms of drug policy and cannabis?
I am clear that the current administration wants to return the United States to prohibition. I am clear that this is just another way for them to push their agenda against Black and brown people. Nothing has changed. The work that I am doing with the Minority Cannabis Business Association will be to end prohibition. And, you know, legislation to do that isn't enough. That legislation will have to include, you know, concepts around race equity, concepts around things like gentrification, of course, you know, that was just brought up as we talked about what happened in Colorado. As these states regulate their programs in a silo, you know, we have an opportunity to look at the best practices throughout the country and try to get it right. I think California is a great example of that. While we are doing this on a state-by-state basis, California has taken the initiative to say, hey, the war on drugs, you know, tremendously impacted these communities specifically. And so we are going to, you know, give some priority to these communities, not only in starting up businesses, but then reinvesting those revenues into those communities that bore the brunt.
I love that idea. I love that idea, but the problem with that is it's 3 billionaire white guys in Silicon Valley that are controlling the entire California market, and because they want to export it, California produces 8 times as much marijuana as consumed. So you can bet who's going to be part of this, and it's futile, and it's wonderful to have people at the table, but all it's going to be is people at the table. The alcohol industry is the same thing. The alcohol-related offenses are responsible for twice as many arrests than all drugs combined, and that's a legal, regulated drug. Show me in American history where we have regulated something successfully in a way that protects public health over private profit. It does not happen. That's very different than for medical. If you want to do medical marijuana, you talked about patients earlier, then let's regulate that. I totally agree. Let's have medical components that are not obviously smoked, because we don't smoke any medicine, but at a pharmacy with doctors, that's a separate issue. But this dreamland that many people have, that it's going to somehow, we're going to get it right after 200 years and include the voices that need to be included, is nothing more than lip service from the rich white guys that serve on the boards of the major organizations like Marijuana Policy Project.
Kevin, I want to talk to Ben, because Ben is a recovered addict, got clean. Ben, let me share this with you from Nikos. Nikos says making cannabis more widely available would assist many people moving away from opioids and other more harmful substances, including alcohol and tobacco. We're in the very last, 30 seconds of this show. Is that something that you can get behind?
So when it comes to recovery, I think that that's such a personal journey that it's about as smart to give love advice as it is to give advice to somebody you don't know there. Like for me, abstinence from all mood-altering substances has really been the trick, and it's something that has allowed me to become who I want to be and pursue the relationships and pursue my spirituality. So if other people take it a different route, hey, that's on them. But for people who are wired like I am, who just need more, that one wouldn't have worked for me.
Ben Court, Kevin Subbett, Carl Hart, Shanita Penny, thank you for this vibrant conversation. The conversation about marijuana and legalizing it goes on in the United States. Our conversation continues at #AJStream. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.